Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you wish to interact with my show or any other shows around the network directly, you can do that in one of two ways. You can either click the $sign in the comment section, leave a tip or donation, or through the super chats, super things, and super stickers features here on YouTube. Comment anything concerning the show or anything concerning your fantasy football exploits. It's a great way to interact with my show and others. Greatly appreciated, and most importantly, makes this show that much better. Without further ado, let us jump into our second segment of the day here, transitioning from the starts to the sits. We always have to talk about the negative aspects of fantasy football. Somehow, and unfortunately, these five players at each position that I've picked aren't necessarily, favorable options for you in this week. So without further ado, let's talk about them. At the QE position, Bo Nix unfortunately finds himself on my sit list. Now, I know that there are opportunities there to be had for him in the pass game against this kind of confusing Ravens pass defense, one that hasn't really gotten going, and it's been one of the parts of Bo Nix's game that has been improving steadily over these past couple of weeks, especially in the play action. We can take advantage of moving out of structure, creating plays with his legs. But I just feel like at some point, this Ravens defense will round into form and Bo Nix will get a little bit ahead of himself. These past couple of weeks, we've seen great growth and maturity from him, but he hasn't really played anyone noteworthy. And in this Ravens team, it's going to make him play catch-up. And when you have to play catch-up against a team like the Ravens, you're going to find yourself forcing things a lot, especially in the offensive side of the football. So look for Bo Nix to potentially be a little bit more erratic than he's been these past few weeks against a team that actually knows how to drive in the football field, score points, and most importantly, close you out. Well, not entirely in some regards, but at least in certain ways, knows how to put up points and how to, most importantly, win football games. Enough football games to, maybe not mentioning their close game reputation. But Bo Nix, nevertheless, finds himself on the sit list because of that factor. Now, for the running back position, this one's a little bit of a weird one because we don't necessarily know how the Packers are going to play this. We don't necessarily know if Jordan Love will start this game, even though it's looking more and more likely that he could. But in terms of how this looks for Josh Jacobs, I feel like if you're the Packers, either way, no matter which quarterback you go with, you're going to have to feel like you have to throw the football more often than you like. Because Josh Jacobs is a great weapon, and yes, the absence of Aiden Hutchinson, there's a lot of questions surrounding the Lions' run defense and how they can stop certain running backs, especially a guy like Josh Jacobs who's very physical with his running style. But the fact that there's so many questions now surrounding who's going to play quarterback for the Packers come Sunday leads me to believe that Josh Jacobs' status could be ever-changing and so volatile in this game. There could be moments where they might need him to try and wear down this Lions defense if they're still in the game. But if they're playing catch-up, if they're falling behind in this one, they're going to have to, either way, whether it be Love or Willis starting, throw the football on the field to try and keep up with the Lions. Because we know the Lions are going to score in this game, no matter how impressive the Packers' defense has been in terms of generating takeaways. But Josh Jacobs just feels like one of those players who his status is just too volatile and interchangeable that we don't necessarily know how solid of a choice he'll be in our fantasy squads. So that's why I feel like he's someone who I'm comfortable with saying, okay, maybe I have to sit him this week because of what the Packers look like headed into this game. And it's a sad one because he's a special fantasy talent. He's someone who sits kind of on the periphery of two different tiers, that tier 2, tier 3 kind of situation. But he is someone who, this week at the very least, doesn't necessarily look to project to be someone who I would play in my fantasy squad. Then the wide receiver position. This one is unusual as well because this isn't necessarily a matchup you would say CeeDee Lamb would necessarily quote unquote lose, but it is one that I feel like because of the struggles of this offense could prove to be very frustrating for CeeDee Lamb. Yes, the Falcons' pass defense has not lived up to par, but I feel like in a way the Cowboys' offense just finds ways to cater to opposing defenses no matter their style. I feel like Dak is too uncomfortable in certain situations. He doesn't necessarily trust any other receivers outside of CeeDee Lamb, or he can't necessarily get the ball to players that he might want to incorporate them into this offense. So it just leaves this weird kind of gap and gray area between what the Cowboys offense could look like and what it really is. And so I feel like right now it's unusual to say that CeeDee Lamb will find himself on my sit list this week. But even against a Falcons defense that can be scored upon easily, I feel like if you can't open up avenues where you don't have to rely on CeeDee Lamb too much, but he's still someone you have to account for, then I don't see how that sense of variance in this Cowboys offense that's missing can contribute to positive aspects for their two contract players. If you can't prove that Dak and CD can perform within the structures of an offense rather than just as individuals, then there's really no hope in the Cowboys being diverse enough to where you can say, okay, maybe CD can become more matchups oriented. I can pick and choose when and how to use him in my fantasy squad instead of just hoping and praying that week in, week out, he's going to be the superstar wide receiver we know he is. So that's why I'm kind of confused on how to rate CeeDee Lamb going forward. But for now, in this weird matchup, he's on my sit list for Week 9. To the tight end position, even though I projected his quarterback to be one of my favorite starts of the week, Dallas Goedert is slowly losing his luster that he kind of gained mid-season, where he looked like one of the top weapons for the Eagles going forward. And I feel like he still could be in certain moments, but I just feel like the Eagles' best offensive performances have stemmed from the ability to be efficient and explosive at the same time. We saw it against the Bengals, where Jalen Hurts wasn't afraid to go deep, but he also knows what he has in the backfield with Saquon, and he knows that he can have different weapons help him in, say, short to intermediate areas of the field as well. Dallas Goedert is one of these weapons, but against a Jaguars team that can frustrate you, I feel like they're going to try and take away what they know they can, and that is the short to intermediate areas of the field. I don't know how they'll hold up on islands against receivers like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, but if they try and remain compact in the middle of the field, then I see frustrating moments for guys like Dallas Goedert in this game. So it truly depends on how the Jaguars really present their defense on the day. And not for nothing, I feel like, it's going to be tough trying to ignore what A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith can do. But I think that, A, you need to try and confine the short and intermediate areas of the field, but B, you also have to worry about Jalen Hurts, like I said, his legs, and how he can compete out of structure. So they're going to focus a lot on A, generating pressure, but B, making sure that short to intermediate areas of the field are availed to Jalen Hurts. So that's why I feel like Dallas Goedert is not necessarily someone I have high hopes for in this matchup. But I'm not necessarily condemning him to tight end 4-5 status. He still is someone who merits conversation in terms of a starting tight end. because this is one of the more interesting markets in the fantasy landscape because of how much depth there is and how much depth there's proven to be this season outside of, the big guns at the top. So Dallas Goedert is someone who week in, week out might find himself on either one of these lists based off of the Eagles' performance as a whole. Because not only is Dallas Goedert one of the weirdest tight ends, the Eagles are one of the weirdest teams in the NFL. And so we can't necessarily gauge how certain position players for them can pan out week by week, especially when they haven't had the toughest of schedules for any team. Especially going into this week against the Jags, we know that they'll have their matchups. It's just a matter of which matchups won't be there for them going forward. Then the final defense that I want to talk about in terms of a sitting perspective in fantasy is the Green Bay Packers. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is still a team that I know is one of the best in terms of generating takeaways. Lead the league, I believe, in takeaways. Xavier McKinney, their star corner, leading the league in interceptions. Jaire Alexander, not far behind. But this is the Lions we're talking about. And no matter how they win, I feel like the inevitability of them winning is starting to take hold. No matter how they come at you. Because they have at least 3 to 4 different game plans. They have a game plan where they can ground you in submission like they did against the Seahawks. They have a game plan where they can beat you on special teams like they did with the Titans. They have a game plan where they can pass the football well like they did against the Vikings. They have so much versatility. Ben Johnson is so comfortable as their offensive coordinator now that he's in his bag most games. And every single coordinator, Aaron Glenn, I don't know the name of their special teams coordinator, but him as well, Dan Campbell even, has this group playing some of the best football they've ever played. And that's a daunting task for any defense. Even a defense that's confident they can at least create plays in their defense, like the Packers. That's why I feel like, even though the Packers are a defense that might be popular this week, as people truly want to see the Lions tested in every single department, I don't necessarily think they have the depth and experience that people think they do. I think they're finally going to be proven as paper tigers, and there are going to be some vulnerabilities and flaws we have not seen thus far for this Packers defense. Let me know what you think in the comments about my sits for this week. They're very different in terms of what I see in my starters that I feel like makes them stand out, in that they're all in just very difficult predicaments and scenarios for their teams and for themselves. So that's why I feel that my sits are so important. But when we come back after the break, we get into implications, starting off with the NFL and the fantasy implications on certain games there, and then getting into the college football landscape as well. Be right back to this short break to talk about that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to